What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is actually going to be in reverse because we've already removed the oil pan and the gasket, and now that we know how to do it, we're just going to show you the reinstallation. So if you want to see the removal, you can just kind of go step by step, starting at the end of the video to where we are now. So here I've got the pan all cleaned up, and a couple notes about getting the original gasket off. You'll know if this job has been done before if your original gasket is riveted to the pan. There are two rivets here, and if you can't get the gasket off, you have to drill those two rivets out. So I just used a real small, like an 1/8 inch drill bit, drop the phone, and put a little bit of a mark in each rivet until it starts to spin out, and that means you got the rivet. You'll be able to pull the gasket off. And I actually went a step further. You might not have to do this, but I took a file and very gently worked that rivet down until it was flush. I don't think it makes a big difference, but that's just an extra step I did. Something else we're going to do at this point is probably unnecessary but much easier, is we do not have an oil cooler, but we do have an oil cooler block-off adapter, and there's a gasket there, so we're going to replace that gasket while we have it out. Other than that, we just cleaned the pan out as best as we could, cleaned the gasket surface, and then cleaned the mating surface on the bottom of the engine. So I'm waiting on a couple gaskets here. Once we get those on, we'll show you getting this back up into the vehicle. Alright, we got our gasket in place and basically slid the pan up from the back to the front. So you're going to tuck the front end of it up and over the axle. Watch your pickup tube that it drops down into the baffle, down into the low end like it needs to. And that's pretty much it. You slide it back. Once you get past the bell housing in the rear, you'll be able to push it straight up and into place. And so now we're just going to start our bolts real loosely all the way around. And once we get closer, I'll give you a better look at that. Getting closer on our oil pan bolts. Just a few more to go, and they are mostly the same size. You've got some short ones, and then your two long ones in the back, obviously, so it makes sense where everything goes. I've reconnected my oil level sensor there. We have to bolt our transmission cooler lines, just the bracket for those, to the passenger side of the pan. There's just a small 10mm bolt there. We'll put our 10mm bolt back in the side of this plastic cover under the starter. And then there's another plastic cover that bolts on with a single 10mm bolt right there. Once we get to that point, we're basically going to lift the front axle back up into place, and we removed two mounting bolts for that. So we've got our lower one there, and I'll try and show you the upper one from the front once we get to that point. Alright, we're just finishing up torquing all the bolts on the oil pan. The best I could find is that all of the short bolts are 18 foot-pounds. The rear two long bolts, which are the 10mm long bolts, are 106 inch-pounds, and the two 15mm bolts coming in from the bell housing area are 37 foot-pounds. And you'll just use a crisscross pattern, which you can find online if needed, or just kind of common sense back and forth, working from the middle outward as you tighten those. So our next step now is going to be to lift this axle, front axle, back up into place. And so we're looking to get it lined up with its two mounting bolts over here on the passenger side and get those nuts started. And then we'll put our lower bolt on the driver's side back in, and then our upper bolt is right up there, going from left to right. A little bit hard to show, but you're able to reach that. These are all 21s on both sides, on the nut and the bolt, and you're able to reach that on the outside with a ratchet, so towards the tire with a ratchet and a socket, And then on the inside, you can hold that. I'll show you that right there. You can hold that with a wrench. So we're just going to push that back up into place, get those bolts tightened down. We'll put our wiring running across the front of the pan back up in place. That just clips in. And then we did pull this wiring that just runs over the top of the axle and comes around the bottom and plugs in right there. So I'll kind of bring you along with that, and if not, I'll show you what that looks like as soon as we get it done. Alright, just a quick thing on this front harness bracket. There's a pin on the left side as you're looking at it from the front. That just slides into a hole on the pan, and then there's a bolt on the right side, or the driver's side, that goes in there, 10mm bolt, in the same spot as that pin right there on this passenger side. So we're securing that, and then we're going to secure the bracket on these transmission cooler lines. That's just up on the side. I'll try and show that. Right up in there. It's easier to get to from the rear. So we'll secure that, reconnect our electrical that's hanging down there. You can see that. And then we're ready to bolt the front differential back in place. And here's a look from the rear now. We're looking towards the front of the car. Just ahead of this oil level sensor is where that 10mm bolt is holding the oil cooler or transmission cooler lines in place. So using a 10mm wrench, you can lock that in place. We are putting the axle back in place here, and I just want to kind of show the way we're doing this. We have the advantage of an air jack here, lifting up roughly in the center, just to the passenger side of the pumpkin, and we're just ahead of our bolts, and so we're going to lift up. You could do this with a regular jack too, to put some pressure on it, and then just smack it back with a hammer until it aligns with the bolts and falls into place. So I've just got a little bit of upward force on it. You could pry it or push it or hammer it, whatever works, but I want to try and show this falling into place. There it went. So you can see we just fell into place, and then I'm going to lift a little bit more just to start our nut and hold that. Then we'll come back to the driver's side and get our two mounting bolts started there. What worked well for us putting the differential back in place is to actually start with the bottom bolt. So you'll lift it up until that hole is lined up, and I actually used a punch just to kind of pull the differential back and into place. Knocked that bolt in with a punch and a hammer, and then if you lower, just slightly lower the whole differential, it will rock on that pivot point and line up your upper bolt perfectly. So we've got our two bolts in, we're going to tighten those down, and again those are 21s. And then I think we are pretty much done. We're going to put our cross member back in here on the frame. That just bolts in with two bolts here and two bolts there. And if I run into anything else, I'll let you know. Not a major update here, but we're just moving along. We got our two bolts in on the driver's side of the differential, like I mentioned. Tighten down our two 21mm nuts on the passenger side. And now we're just bolting the cross member. It's got two 18mm bolts on the passenger side, and then two 18mm bolts here on the driver's side. And each side does have nuts on the back side. And I think they're the same size, 18 on front and back, both sides. So we'll get that in. Got the oil filter back on. Tighten the drain plug, and we'll just put our splash shields back in place, but I'm going to run it first and just look around for any leaks before we do that. But once we do have that, we just have our metal splash shield here and our plastic splash shield up here in the front. So that's basically it. Not much else to show. I guess if this does not take care of our leak, you won't see this video. So in that case, thanks for watching. If you do have any questions, make sure to leave those in the comments down below. Like and subscribe, and see you guys on the next video.